The ammonia scent of the glass cleaner was sharp in the quiet of the penthouse. Amara wiped the final streak from the floor-to-ceiling window, her reflection a soft, distorted shape against the glittering tapestry of Shinjuku at night. Below, the city was a river of light, a silent, pulsing thing of immense energy. Up here, on the 80th floor of the Ishikawa Tower, there was only the whisper of the ventilation system and the sound of her own steady breathing. Her uniform, a simple light blue dress and a crisp white apron, was designed for invisibility. In this world of tailored Italian suits and quiet, lethal men, Amara was meant to be furniture that moved. For 2 years, she had perfected the art. She kept her head down, her movements efficient, her presence erased. She saw everything and was seen by no one. It was the safest way to be. The office was a monument to minimalist power. Black marble floors, a single, vast desk of polished ebony, and the wall of glass she had just cleaned. And in the corner, near a pair of low leather armchairs, was the chessboard. It called to her every night. The board was a slab of polished granite, the squares alternating between pale, veined white and obsidian black. The pieces were hand-carved, ivory and onyx, each one a miniature sculpture. The White King, a stoic emperor. The Black Queen, a warrior with a face of cold fury. It was a work of art, a weaponized thing of beauty. She allowed herself a moment, her cleaning cloth still in hand, to trace the line of a black knight's carved mane in the air. A perfect Rui Lopez opening, frozen mid-thought. She could almost feel the phantom weight of the pieces in her hand, the cool, smooth stone, the hum of possibilities. You play. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence like shattering glass. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. She spun around, her face carefully blank. He was standing by the desk, a place that had been empty moments before. Kaido Ishikawa. He moved like that, a phantom in his own domain. He was the devil she worked for, the owner of the tower, the unseen hand that moved pieces across the entire city. She had only ever seen him in passing, a blur of perfect tailoring and chilling stillness. Now he was looking directly at her. His suit was a dark charcoal, so exquisitely cut it seemed a part of him. A platinum watch gleamed at his wrist, but it was the ink that held her gaze. At his throat, the tail of a dragon coiled, its scales a deep, menacing blue-black, disappearing beneath the starched white collar of his shirt. More ink crawled over the back of his hands, intricate patterns that vanished into his cuffs. His eyes were dark, unreadable, and fixed on her. "It is a question, not an accusation," he said, his voice a low baritone, smooth as whiskey. Amara's training kicked in. Bow her head. Apologize. Disappear. "Forgive me, sir. I was just admiring the set." He didn't move. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. He was assessing her, the way he might assess a new acquisition or a potential threat. She was just the janitor. A ghost in a blue dress. She was nothing. She had to be nothing. "Your hands," he said. She looked down at her own hands, encased in thin, cleaning gloves. They were strong, capable hands. They hovered over the board. As if they knew the weight of the pieces, he took a step toward the corner. "Seat." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced her composure. "Sir, I have to finish my rounds. The floors can wait." He gestured to the chair opposite the board. It was not a request. It was an order, delivered with the soft, unshakable certainty of a man who had never been disobeyed. Slowly, her limbs feeling like they were moving through water, Amara walked to the chair. She peeled off her gloves, tucking them into her apron pocket. The leather of the chair was cool against her back as she sat. He took the seat opposite her, the white pieces before him. His presence seemed to suck the air from the room, making it thin and hard to breathe. He smelled of something clean and sharp, like cedar and cold night air. He gestured to the board. "Your color." She was the night crew, the help. A black woman from a world away, scrubbing floors in his ivory tower. He was the Oyabun of the Ishikawa-kai, a man whose name was spoken in whispers in the darkest corners of Tokyo. And he was asking her to play chess.
It was a test.
Or a game of a different sort. A cat amusing itself with a mouse before the final, inevitable snap. Her grandfather had taught her the game. Taught her on a worn, foldable cardboard set in his dusty apartment back in Chicago. He taught her that chess wasn't a game of kings and queens. It was a game of patterns, of sacrifice, of seeing 10 moves ahead while your opponent was only seeing one. He told her she had a gift, a mind that saw the board in 3 dimensions. She'd been a prodigy, winning tournaments, her picture in local papers. A life she had run from, a past she had buried under years of determined anonymity. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly, and took a black pawn. She placed it before her. A declaration. He made his first move, pushing the king's pawn forward 2 spaces.
Classic.
Aggressive. He expected her to be an amateur, to make a simple, reactive move. Instead, she mirrored him, her own pawn advancing. The Sicilian defense. A quiet challenge. His eyes flickered, a brief, almost imperceptible spark of interest. They played in silence, the only sound the soft, heavy click of stone on stone. He was a ruthless player, his attacks surgical and swift. He sacrificed a knight to shatter her queenside defense, his movements economical and precise. He played like he moved, like he commanded, with absolute control. But Amara had played against sharks like him before, men who used brute force and intimidation as a strategy. She didn't flinch. She gave ground, letting him advance, drawing him deeper into her territory. She built a quiet, intricate web of defense, her pieces supporting each other in unseen ways. She saw the trap. He was laying 3 moves before he set it. He was trying to force her queen out, to leave her king exposed. Instead of moving her queen, she moved her bishop, a subtle, unassuming shift that completely dismantled his attack. He paused, his hand hovering over his rook. He looked up from the board, and for the first time, his eyes were not just on the game. They were on her. He was seeing past the blue uniform, past the woman who cleaned his floors. He was seeing his opponent. The game deepened. An hour passed. The city lights outside seemed to burn brighter. Amara was no longer the janitor. Kaito was no longer the boss. They were 2 minds locked in a silent, brutal war over 64 squares. She was forced to sacrifice her own bishop to save her king, a move that cost her, but kept her in the game. He pressed his advantage, his pieces closing in. It felt like a slow suffocation. But her grandfather had taught her how to fight from the corners, how to find hope in a lost position. She saw it. A single, desperate line of play. A path to survival. It would require her to give up her remaining rook, but if he took the bait, she could force a perpetual check. A draw. She made the move. The silence that followed was absolute. He stared at the board, his face an unreadable mask of stone. She could see the intricate lines of the dragon tattoo on his neck, the way it seemed to writhe with every subtle shift of his posture. He saw it too. The trap. The escape. The undeniable truth that she had matched him. He could have taken the rook and ended the game with his overwhelming advantage, but he would have exposed his king. She had found the one flaw in his fortress. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned back in his chair. He did not make a move. He simply looked at her, his dark eyes holding an intensity that made the air crackle. "No one has forced a draw against me in 10 years, he said, his voice a low murmur. Amara's throat was dry. It was a lucky move. "There is no luck on this board," he countered, his gaze unwavering. "Only calculation. And intent." The intercom on his desk buzzed, a harsh intrusion. He ignored it. His focus was entirely on her. She felt pinned by it, exposed. The anonymity she had so carefully cultivated was stripped away, burned off by the heat of his attention. She began to stand, the spell broken. I should finish my work." "No," the word was soft, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. "You will not," he stood, walking not to his desk, but to the window. He looked out at the city that was his kingdom, his back to her. "Tomorrow night,
Same time.
You will not bring your cart. You will not wear that uniform. You will come here. And we will finish our game. She stood frozen by the table, the scent of ammonia and cedar clinging to her. Her old life, her quiet, invisible life, was over. She had made a move she could not take back. And she had the terrifying feeling that she had just been captured by a king she had no hope of escaping. The next night, the air in the penthouse was different. It was charged, humming with an unspoken tension. Amara wore a simple black dress she'd bought that afternoon, the fabric feeling foreign against her skin after years in uniform. She felt exposed, every line of her plus-sized frame on display. When she entered, he was already there, sitting at the board, waiting. He wasn't in a suit, but in a simple black silk shirt, unbuttoned at the collar. The dragon at his throat was more visible now, its claws seeming to grip his very skin. He didn't greet her. He simply gestured to the board, where the pieces were set exactly as they had been left. A stalemate waiting to be broken. The games became their ritual. Every night, she would arrive, and they would play. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they sat in a profound silence that felt more intimate than any conversation. She learned the rhythms of his play, the cold logic, the flashes of brutal creativity. And he, she realized, was learning hers. He was studying her, not just her strategy on the board, but the way she held herself, the flicker of emotion in her eyes when she was cornered, the small, satisfied breath she took when a plan came together. One night, after a particularly grueling game that she narrowly lost, he didn't immediately reset the board. He stared at the carved ivory king in his hand, his thumb rubbing over its smooth surface. "It was a gift," he said, his voice quiet. Amara waited, knowing this was a departure from their silent contract. "From Hannah," he continued, "my mentor's wife. She believed a man's mind could be seen in how he played, whether he was a builder or a destroyer, a coward or a king." He placed the piece back on its square, the sound echoing in the stillness. A shadow passed over his face, a flicker of something deep and painful. It was the first crack she had ever seen in his marble facade. "She was a builder," he said, the words sounding strange in his mouth. "She saw art in everything. Even in men like us." He looked at Amara, his gaze distant. "She was killed. In a restaurant bombing. It was meant for me. A message from the Sadogumi. I was late to the dinner. She was not. There it was. The wound. The shame he carried, heavier than any crown. He had failed to protect the one person who saw something more than a monster in him. Amara saw the echo of that failure in the way he guarded his king on the board, surrounding it with a fortress of pawns and powerful pieces, a fortress that Amara, somehow, had managed to breach. The revelation hung between them, fragile and dangerous. She didn't offer condolences. Words like that were useless in his world, an insult to the depth of his loss. Instead, she simply nodded, a small, sharp acknowledgement of his pain. Their next game was interrupted. Two men, broad-shouldered and silent, entered the office without knocking. They bowed low to Kaido, their faces grim. "There is a problem," the older one said. "The shipment at the docks. It was hit. An ambush. It's the Sadogumi. They knew the route. A traitor." The word was unspoken but filled the room. Kaido's demeanor shifted instantly. The chess player vanished, replaced by the oyabun. His eyes went cold, his posture sharpened into something lethal. Amara felt a chill crawl up her spine. This was the man who commanded death with a nod. He gave a series of quiet, rapid-fire orders. The men bowed again and left. Kaido turned, and his eyes landed on Amara. She was a complication. A witness. She had heard too much. One of his lieutenants, a man named Ryota, with a scar that cut through his left eyebrow, lingered at the door. "What about her?" he asked, his voice flat, his eyes on Amara as if she were a piece of trash to be disposed of. Kaido was silent for a long moment. He walked to his desk, took out a thick envelope of cash and a plane ticket, and placed them on the chessboard between them. "This is a flight to Chicago. Leaving in 3 hours," Kaido said, his voice devoid of emotion. Enough money to start over. You will go to the airport, and you will forget this building, this city, and my face. You will go back to being invisible. It was a dismissal, an escape, a lifeline back to the world she knew. All she had to do was take it. She looked at the ticket, the crisp edges promising safety, anonymity. Then she looked at him. She saw the storm gathering around him, the isolation of a king on a throne of knives. She saw the ghost of Hannah in his eyes, the shame of a failure he was determined never to repeat. Running was the smart move, the only move. But her grandfather had also taught her that sometimes the most courageous move was not to retreat, but to hold the line. Slowly, deliberately, she pushed the ticket back across the board. Her hand was steady. She met his gaze, her heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. "It's your move," she said. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He stared at her a long, searching look that seemed to strip away every layer of her soul. He was seeing not just an opponent, but an ally. Someone who, when given the choice between safety and the storm, chose the storm. Chose him. He reached across the board, his fingers closing over a white knight. As he moved the piece, the back of his hand brushed against hers. The contact was brief, a ghost of a touch, but it sent a jolt of heat straight through her. In that touch, a pact was sealed. The game had changed, and the board was no longer just 64 squares of stone. It was the whole city. He didn't send her away. Instead, he brought her deeper in. The next day, 2 of his men moved her out of her small apartment and into a sprawling suite 2 floors below his penthouse. It was a gilded cage, beautiful and secure, with the same breathtaking views of the city. She was no longer Amara the janitor. She was something else.
His guest.
His prisoner. His strategist. The lines were so blurred they had ceased to exist. The Sadogumi, emboldened by their successful ambush, escalated their attacks. They were testing the borders of his territory, a series of small, violent incursions designed to bleed his resources and sow fear. Kaido spent his days in meetings, his voice a low, dangerous rumble behind closed doors. But at night, he still came to the chessboard. It had become their war room. One evening, as she was waiting for him, his lieutenant, Ryota, brought her a tray of tea. "He is delayed," the man said, his scarred face impassive. "A matter at the garage." A sudden, gut-wrenching premonition seized her. Kaido never varied his routine. A change meant something was wrong. "The garage?" she asked, standing up. Ryota's expression didn't change, but he didn't stop her as she walked toward the private elevator. The ride down was silent and heavy. When the doors opened to the subterranean parking garage, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Several black sedans were parked at odd angles. Kaido's men stood with a tense, coiled energy. Kaido himself was standing near his car, a sleek, black Rolls-Royce, talking in low tones to a man holding a sophisticated-looking electronic device. Amara started walking toward him, and that's when she saw it. Taped to the underside of the driver's side door handle, a small, ugly block of plastic with a blinking red light.
A bomb.
Small, but placed to kill the person who opened the door. Ryota grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Stay here." But her eyes were locked on Kaido. He was too close. He was directing his men, calm and collected, but he was still within the blast radius. At that moment, the blinking light on the device sped up. Kaido. The name was ripped from her throat, a raw sound of pure terror. His head snapped up. His eyes found hers across the 20 feet of concrete that separated them. In that split second, his composure broke. She saw raw, undiluted fear in his eyes. Not for himself. For her. One of his men shouted, and then the world dissolved into a deafening roar and a wave of heat. Kaido moved faster than she could have imagined. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, tackling her, wrapping his body around hers and driving them both to the ground behind the solid pillar of the elevator bank. Concrete dust and the acrid smell of explosives filled the air as shards of metal and glass rained down around them. His weight was heavy and solid on top of her, shielding her completely. His face was buried in her hair, his breath coming in harsh gasps. "Are you hurt?" he growled, his voice rough with adrenaline. "Amara, are you hurt?" She couldn't speak, just shook her head, her hands clutching the fine silk of his shirt. He stayed there for a moment longer, a warm, protective weight in the ringing silence that followed the blast. The moment he almost lost her had shattered the last of his control. Later, back in the penthouse, the silence was thick with unspoken things. He had a shallow cut on his cheek from a piece of flying debris. She took a first aid kit from a bathroom cabinet and dabbed it with an antiseptic wipe, her touch gentle. He stood perfectly still, his eyes closed, letting her tend to him. He was planning his retaliation. Maps of the city were spread across his desk. He was moving pieces again, but these pieces were men, loyal soldiers he was preparing to send into the fire. He pointed to a location, a warehouse the Sadogumi used as a front. "We hit them here. A full frontal assault. We end this." Amara looked at the map, her mind working, seeing the patterns. "No," she said softly. He opened his eyes, his gaze sharp.
No.
"It's a trap," she said, her voice gaining strength. "It's what he wants you to do. He's an aggressive player. He's inviting you to attack his queen, but it's a sacrifice. He's left his king's side weak, but he's counting on you not seeing it because you'll be focused on the frontal assault. He'll flank you. You'll lose half your men." She took a red pen and drew a new line on the map, a circuitous route to a different location, a small, seemingly insignificant shipping office. "This is his command center, not the warehouse. He runs his entire operation from here. You don't launch a frontal assault. You feint toward the warehouse, draw his main force there. Then you cut the head off the snake here. It's ruthless. It's cold. But it will work." She had crossed a line. She was no longer just a player in a game. She was drawing the battle plans. She was thinking like him, seeing the world as a board of acceptable losses and strategic sacrifices. Kaido stared at the map, then at her. The admiration in his eyes was mingled with something darker, something akin to awe. He reached out, his fingers gently touching the side of her face. "No one," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper, "has ever looked at the board and seen what I see. Until you." It wasn't a confession of love. It was something deeper, more dangerous. An admission of souls recognizing each other in the dark. "I told myself staying was just a game," she whispered back, her voice trembling slightly. "I was lying to myself." The Sadogumi knew they had failed, and they realized why. They had underestimated the woman at the king's side. The next day, a message arrived for her. It was a single photograph slipped under her suite door. It was of her younger sister, Nia, laughing as she walked out of a coffee shop in Chicago, a city half a world away. There was no explicit threat. There didn't need to be. The message was clear. "We know who you are. We know where to find your heart." The war was no longer his. It was hers. The photograph felt like ice in her hands. Her carefully constructed walls, the anonymity she had built her life upon, had been shattered. They had reached across an ocean and aimed a knife at the one person she had left in the world. Her rage was a cold, quiet thing. It settled deep in her bones, solidifying into a diamond-hard resolve. When Kaido saw the photo, a stillness fell over him that was more terrifying than any outburst of anger. The air in the penthouse dropped 10 degrees. The dragon on his skin seemed to darken. He made a single phone call, his Japanese too low and rapid for her to follow, but the lethal intent was unmistakable. When he hung up, he looked at her. "I will send a team to Chicago," he said, his voice flat and absolute. "Your sister will be protected. She will never even know she was in danger. And I will burn the Sadogumi to the ground until nothing is left but ash." "No," Amara said, her voice steady. She placed the photograph on the chessboard, right on the central square. "Burning them down isn't enough. They came for my family. This has to be an execution, not a war." That night, the Sada boss sent a message. He proposed a parley. A meeting at a neutral location, the abandoned Shiwari warehouse by the docks. He wanted to discuss a truce. He wanted Kaido to come alone, and to bring the woman. A trade. Her for peace. It's a trap, Kaido said immediately, dismissing it. He wants you as leverage. He'll kill us both. I know, Amara replied, her eyes fixed on the chessboard. He's playing his endgame. He thinks he's cornered my king by threatening my queen. She looked up at Kaido. But he doesn't realize the queen is the one calling the shots. I'm going with you. Absolutely not. You don't have a choice, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. I know how he thinks.
I've played against his style 100 times in my head.
He's arrogant. He's predictable. He will expect you to bring a hidden army. He will have a sniper, a contingency for your betrayal. But he won't have a contingency for mine. She laid out the plan, her voice calm and precise, moving the onyx and ivory pieces on the board to represent men and positions. It was a masterpiece of misdirection and psychological warfare, built around her intimate understanding of their opponent's mind. Kaido would arrive with her, seemingly vulnerable. But their real forces would be using the feint she designed, striking the true heart of the Sadogumi Empire while its leader was playing games at the docks. She would be the bait, but she was also the strategist. The warehouse smelled of salt, rust, and decay. Rain lashed against the corrugated metal walls. Inside, it was a vast cavern of shadows, lit by a few bare, swinging bulbs. The Sado boss, a smug, heavy-set man named Kenji, stood in the center, flanked by a dozen of his men. Kaido walked in with Amara at his side, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. He was a portrait of calm authority, but Amara could feel the tension coiled in him like a spring. You came, Kenji said with a greasy smile.
Wise.
Hand over the woman, and we can avoid more bloodshed. You threatened her family, Kaido said, his voice dangerously soft. There is no version of this that ends in peace.
Kenji laughed.
You are in no position to make demands, he nodded to a man lurking in the high rafters. The glint of a rifle scope caught the light. The sniper, just as Amara had predicted. Your mistake, Amara said, her voice ringing out in the cavernous space, is thinking you're playing against him. All eyes turned to her. In that moment of surprise, she acted. To her left was a stack of old, rusted oil drums. With a surge of adrenaline, she shoved the stack with all her might. The drums crashed to the concrete floor with a deafening clang, a chaotic, rolling wave of metal. It was the diversion. The sniper, startled, flinched. His focus shifted for a single, vital second. It was all Kaido needed. The world exploded into motion. Kaido moved, a blur of deadly grace. A knife appeared in his hand as if from nowhere. The men with him, who had seemed like simple drivers, shed their coats to reveal the body armor and weapons beneath. Gunfire erupted, a deafening cacophony that echoed off the metal walls. Amara dropped to the ground, her heart hammering, as the battle she had designed unfolded around her. She had not fired a weapon, but her move, that simple, desperate shove, had saved Kaido's life and sprung the trap. It was over in minutes. The Sadogumi was ruthlessly, efficiently dismantled. In the aftermath, amidst the silence and the smell of cordite, Kaido walked to her. He crouched down, his eyes searching hers. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch incredibly gentle. He helped her to her feet, his hand warm and strong in hers. Back in the penthouse, the city lights below seemed quiet, peaceful. The storm had passed. The Sadogumi was broken, its leadership decapitated. Kaido stood before her, the faint cut on his cheek the only sign of the violence they had just survived. The silence between them was different now. It was not tense. It was settled. Final. They targeted you because they knew, he said, his voice a low vibration in the quiet room. He took a step closer, closing the small space between them. They thought you were my weakness. He gently took her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones. His gaze was intense, unwavering, a vow in itself. You are not my weakness, Samara, he said, the sound of her name a reverent whisper. You are my queen, the most powerful piece on the board. It was a claim, an anointing. a truth that settled deep in her soul. Her old life was gone, a ghost she could never return to. She had been reborn in this tower of glass and steel, at the side of this dangerous, brilliant man. The cost had been her innocence, her anonymity. His cost was the solitary fortress around his heart, now breached and occupied by her. She didn't answer him with words. Words were no longer necessary. She pulled away from his gentle hold and walked to the chessboard, the silent witness to their entire story. Her fingers found the Black Queen, its onyx surface cool and heavy against her skin. She held it for a long moment, feeling its weight, its power. Then, her eyes locked on his, she placed the piece firmly in the center of the board. A choice made, a position claimed. The game was over. A new reign had just begun.